The great crystal hall of Vex Prime glowed with soft blue light. 12 different alien species sat around the massive circular table. Each race had their own section, with chairs shaped to fit their strange bodies. Some had tentacles, others had multiple arms, and a few floated in special tanks filled with gas. Today's meeting was supposed to be boring. They were talking about trade routes and mining rights on dead planets. Counselor Blex, a tall gray creature with 6 arms, was reading numbers from a data pad. His voice was flat and dull. Most of the other aliens were half asleep or playing with their communication devices. In the observer section, Dr. Kang Tai-hyun sat quietly. He was the only human in the room. Earth had just been granted permission to send one person to watch the meetings. Most aliens ignored him completely. To them, humans were just another primitive species that might be useful someday. Elder Vorthak sat in the shadows at the edge of the room. The ancient Ketharani was over 800 years old. His people looked like large spiders with wise, glowing eyes. Most council members forgot he was even there. Vorthak rarely spoke anymore, and when he did, others often ignored him. But today was different. Vorthak slowly stood up. His 8 legs clicked against the crystal floor as he walked toward the center of the room. The sound echoed in the quiet hall. One by one, the aliens stopped their conversations and looked at him. "I must speak," Vorthak said. His voice was old but strong. "I bring a warning from the ancient texts." Counselor Blex looked annoyed. "Elder, we are discussing important trade matters. Perhaps your stories can wait for another time." Vorthak's many eyes focused on Blex. "There are no more important matters than what I must tell you today." The room fell silent. Even the floating gas breathers stopped their bubbling sounds. "In the deepest vaults of my people's archives," Vorthak continued, "there are texts older than any civilization in this room. They speak of a species that would one day emerge from a small blue world. The texts call them the Persistent Ones." Commander Yultor, a large warrior with thick armor, laughed loudly. "Old Spider, are you telling us bedtime stories now?" But Vorthak did not stop. These beings would look weak at first. They would have no natural weapons, no thick shells, no ability to breathe poison gas, but they would have something far more dangerous. "What could be dangerous about such pathetic creatures?" asked Admiral Krex, whose species was known for their superior technology. "They never give up," Vorthak said simply. "When others see a wall, they see a ladder. When others see defeat, they see a lesson. When others see impossible, they see interesting." More laughter filled the room. Counselor Blex's 6 arms waved in the air. "Elder, with respect, your ancient texts were written by primitives who thought lightning was magic. We have science now. We have real knowledge." Vorthak turned to look directly at Dr. Kang Tae-hyun. The human met his gaze calmly. "The texts say these beings will change everything, not through strength or technology, but through something the authors could barely understand. They called it stubborn hope." "Stubborn hope?" Yultor snorted. "What kind of weapon is that?" "The most dangerous kind," Vorthak replied. "It spreads to others. It makes the impossible seem possible. It turns every failure into fuel for the next attempt." Dr. Kang Tae-hyun leaned forward slightly, listening to every word. He said nothing, but his eyes were bright with interest. "The humans in this room right now," Vorthak continued, "their planet has no advanced technology. They have not even learned to travel between stars. But look at their history if you dare. Why would we waste time studying primitive savages?" Blex asked. "Because," Vorthak said, "they survived an ice age by making fire. They survived massive floods by building boats. They survived diseases that should have killed them all by creating medicine. Every time the universe tried to end them, they found a way to survive and grow stronger." The room was quiet now. Some of the aliens were starting to look uncomfortable. "Their world should have killed them 1,000 times over," Vorthak went on. "It has deadly weather, dangerous animals, poisonous plants, and massive earthquakes. Most species would have hidden in caves and hoped for the best. But humans did something else." "What?" asked one of the younger council members. "They made the dangerous animals into pets. They turned the poisonous plants into medicine. They used the earthquakes to learn about their planet's structure. They made their deadly world into their home." Commander Yultor shook his massive head. "Even if that's true, there's still just one small species on one small planet. What could they possibly do to threaten the great galactic civilizations?" Vorthak's ancient eyes seemed to glow brighter. "The texts say they will not threaten us. They will inspire us. They will show us possibilities we never imagined. They will make us want to be better than we are. That sounds horrible, muttered Admiral Krex. The worst part, Vorthak said, is that they will do it by being kind. The entire room erupted in laughter. Even the gas breathers made bubbling sounds that might have been chuckling. Kind? Yultor roared. The galaxy is ruled by strength. The strong take what they want from the weak. That's how it has always been. And that, Vorthak said sadly, is why you will not understand until it is too late. Counselor Blex stood up, all 6 arms spread wide. Enough of this nonsense. Elder Vorthak, your age has clearly affected your mind. Perhaps it is time for you to return to your archives and leave real decisions to those who understand the modern galaxy. Vorthak looked around the room one last time. His gaze stopped on Dr. Kang Taehyun, who was still sitting quietly, still listening. I have done my duty, the ancient being said. I have delivered the warning as my ancestors commanded. When the tide turns, when the impossible becomes normal, when hope spreads like wildfire across the stars. Remember this day. Remember that you chose mockery over wisdom. Vorthak turned and walked slowly back to the shadows. His 8 legs clicked softly on the crystal floor. The sound seemed louder now in the sudden silence. Dr. Kang Taehyun reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. He had recorded every word of Vorthak's speech. As he put the device away, he noticed that his hands were completely steady. In the shadows, Elder Vorthak settled back into his chair. He had spoken the truth as the ancient texts commanded. Now he could only wait and watch as the future unfolded exactly as his people's greatest seers had predicted. The meeting returned to talk of trade routes and mining rights, but somehow the numbers seemed less important now. 6 months had passed since Elder Vorthak's warning. The Galactic Council had forgotten all about the old spider's strange words. They were busy with their usual arguments about territory and trade agreements. Everything was normal and predictable. Then the impossible happened. The Council's early warning system started screaming. Alarms echoed through the crystal halls of Vex Prime. Red lights flashed everywhere. Admiral Quex, the military commander in charge of space security, rushed to the main control room. Report, he shouted at the technician on duty. Sir, we have an unknown vessel approaching the station. It's moving faster than light, but the energy signature is completely wrong. Admiral Quex frowned. Every species in the galaxy used the same basic faster-than-light technology. It required massive amounts of energy and created specific patterns that their sensors could easily identify. This ship was different. Show me, Quex commanded. The main screen lit up with an image that made everyone in the control room gasp. A sleek silver ship was gliding toward them. It was beautiful in a simple way, with smooth curves and no visible weapons. But the most shocking thing was the symbol painted on its side, a blue and green circle with white swirls. That's Earth, whispered the technician. That's the human homeworld. Admiral Quex's face turned dark. Impossible. The humans don't have faster-than-light travel. Our scouts confirmed this just last month. Sir, they're requesting permission to dock. The message is in perfect galactic standard language. In the council chambers, emergency meetings were being called. Counselor Blex was pacing back and forth, his 6 arms waving wildly. This has to be some kind of trick. The humans are primitives. They can barely travel to their own moon. Dr. Kang Taehyun sat in his usual spot in the observer section. He was trying very hard not to smile. For 6 months, he had been sending regular reports back to Earth through the Council's communication systems. He had told his people everything about the galactic civilizations, their technology, and their attitudes toward humans. The council chamber doors opened with a soft hiss. Captain Park Min-hyuk walked in, followed by Engineer Lee Ji-won and Ambassador Kim Soo-ho. They wore simple blue uniforms with the Earth symbol on their sleeves. They looked calm and confident, as if walking into a room full of hostile aliens was something they did every day. Captain Park stepped forward and bowed politely. Honored council members, I am Captain Park Min-hyuk of the Earth vessel Harmony. We come in peace and friendship. The silence in the room was so complete that you could hear the soft humming of the air recycling systems. Finally, Counselor Blex found his voice. How did you get here? Your species doesn't have the technology for interstellar travel. Engineer Lee Ji-won stepped forward. She was a small woman with bright eyes and calloused hands. Counselor Blex, We approached the problem differently than your scientists did. Instead of fighting against quantum uncertainty, we learned to work with it. Admiral Quex, who had rushed from the control room, pushed his way to the front. Impossible. Faster-than-light travel requires massive energy sources and complex mathematics. Your primitive world doesn't have the resources. Actually, Li Jiwan said with a gentle smile, we discovered that the universe is more cooperative than we thought. Our drive systems use about 1/10 the energy of your standard models. The alien council members looked at each other in confusion and growing alarm. Their technology was supposed to be the best in the galaxy. How could these primitive humans build something better? Ambassador Kim Suho spoke up. We didn't come here to boast about our technology. We came to offer friendship and cooperation. Dr. Kang Taehyun has told us so much about your great civilizations. We hope to learn from you and perhaps share what little we know. Share? Admiral Quex laughed, but it sounded forced. What could primitives like you possibly teach us? Captain Park's smile never wavered. Perhaps nothing at all, Admiral, but we'd be happy to try if you're willing to test us. That was exactly the wrong thing to say to Admiral Quex. The proud military leader's face turned red with anger. Test you? You think you can come here with one lucky invention and challenge the might of the Galactic Council? Not challenge, Captain Park said quietly. Learn. Admiral Quex stood up to his full height, which was impressive. He was nearly 3 meters tall and covered in natural armor plating. Very well, humans. You want to learn? Let me teach you your place in the Galactic Order. He turned to address the full council. I propose we conduct a series of evaluation tests. Each major species will design a challenge that showcases their greatest strengths. When these humans fail, as they surely will, they can return to their little world and stop pretending to be equals. Counselor Blex nodded eagerly. An excellent idea, Admiral. It will be good for them to understand the natural order of things. Captain Park looked at his companions. Engineer Li Jiwan shrugged and grinned. Ambassador Kim Suho nodded thoughtfully. They seemed to be having a silent conversation. We accept your challenges, Captain Park said. When would you like to begin? The confidence in his voice made several council members uncomfortable. This wasn't how primitive species were supposed to behave. They should be frightened and begging for mercy, not calmly accepting impossible challenges. 1 standard week, Admiral Quex declared. That will give each species time to design appropriate tests. I promise you, humans, these will not be easy. We never expected easy, Captain Park replied. Easy doesn't teach you anything useful. In the back of the chamber, Dr. Kang Taehyun finally allowed himself to smile. He had been on Earth when the breakthrough happened. He had watched engineer Li Jiwan work 18-hour days for 3 months, failing again and again, never giving up. He had seen Captain Park train for every possible scenario, always staying calm under pressure. He had observed Ambassador Kim Suho study the cultural files until he could recite the customs of 12 different species from memory. The aliens thought they were testing humans. Dr. Kang Taehyun knew better. The humans were here to show what they could do. As the council members began arguing about what test to design, Elder Vorthak emerged from the shadows where he had been watching. The ancient Kethrani moved slowly toward the humans. Captain Park, he said in his old strong voice, welcome to the galactic community. Thank you, Elder, Park replied, bowing respectfully. Dr. Kang has told us much about your wisdom. Vorthak's many eyes seemed to twinkle. The young doctor is too kind. But I'm curious, how did your engineer solve the faster-than-light problem so quickly? Li Jiwan stepped forward. Elder Vorthak, we didn't solve it. We just stopped trying to force it. Once we started listening to what the universe was trying to tell us, the answer became obvious. Ah, Vorthak nodded slowly. The persistent ones have arrived at last. The other council members were too busy planning their tests to notice the old spider's words. But Dr. Kang Taehyun heard them, and he remembered Elder Vorthak's warning from 6 months ago. The tide was beginning to turn. The testing arena on Vex Prime had been transformed. Representatives from each major species had designed challenges that would prove their superiority over the newcomer humans. Thousands of aliens filled the viewing stands, eager to watch the primitives fail. Admiral Quex stood at the center of the arena, his armor gleaming under the bright lights. Today, we will demonstrate the natural order of the galaxy. Each test has been designed by our greatest experts to showcase abilities that took our species millions of years to develop. Captain Park Min-hyuk and his team stood calmly nearby. They had spent the week studying each challenge, but they didn't look worried. If anything, they seemed excited. The first challenge, Admiral Quex announced, comes from the Thex Nari, masters of the deep ocean worlds. The arena floor opened up to reveal a massive tank filled with dark water. The liquid was so thick and heavy that it looked almost like black honey. Strange lights flickered in the depths. Commander Theiss of the Thex Nari approached the edge of the tank. Her people looked like giant squids with intelligence and technology. She could breathe both water and air, and her natural pressure tolerance was legendary. This is liquid methane at 15 times standard atmospheric pressure, she explained. The temperature is negative 200 degrees. At the bottom of this tank, there is a navigation puzzle that must be solved to retrieve a crystal artifact. The pressure alone would crush most species instantly. The crowd murmured appreciatively. This was clearly impossible for humans. But Specialist Choi Hyejin stepped forward. She was a marine biologist from Earth who had spent years exploring the deepest parts of Earth's oceans. She wore a bulky pressure suit that looked primitive compared to alien technology. "May I examine the environment first?" she asked politely. Commander Theiss laughed. "Examine all you want, human. The laws of physics don't change because you look at them." Choi Hyejin spent 20 minutes studying the tank, taking measurements and asking questions about the methane composition. The alien audience grew restless. When was she going to admit defeat? Finally, she sealed her helmet and dove into the dark liquid. What happened next shocked everyone. Instead of sinking like a stone, Choi Hyejin moved through the heavy methane with surprising grace. Her primitive suit somehow handled the pressure perfectly. She reached the bottom, studied the navigation puzzle for only a few minutes, and solved it with elegant efficiency. But the real surprise came when she surfaced. She was carrying not just the required crystal, but also a sample of unusual bacteria she had discovered growing on the tank walls. "Commander Theiss," she said, removing her helmet. "I think you might want to study these organisms. They seem to be processing methane in a way that could revolutionize your biofuel industry." The Thex Nari commander stared at the sample in disbelief. No one had ever thought to look for life in their testing tanks. They had just built them to be challenging obstacles. "How did you survive the pressure?" Theiss asked weakly. "My suit uses a liquid breathing system," Choi Hyejin explained. "It's based on research from our deepest ocean trenches. Instead of fighting the pressure, it equalizes with it." The second test came from the Zeph Alliance, masters of mathematics and theoretical physics. Dr. Yoon Ji-hoo, a quantum physicist from Earth, faced a massive holographic display covered with equations that hurt to look at. "These are multi-dimensional quantum calculations," announced Professor Zeph Prime, the Alliance's greatest mathematical mind. They describe the energy flows in a collapsing star. The solution requires understanding of 17 different types of mathematics that your species has never encountered. Dr. Yoon studied the equations for an hour, while the alien audience grew bored. Some started making bets on how quickly he would give up. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of trying to solve the equations as written, Dr. Yoon began erasing parts of them and writing new ones. The alien mathematicians gasped in horror. "You couldn't just change the problem? What are you doing?" Professor Zeph Prime demanded. "I'm simplifying," Dr. Yoon replied calmly. "These equations are trying to describe something very complex in a very complicated way. But if you change your perspective slightly, the whole thing becomes much easier." He continued working, replacing 17 types of alien mathematics with 3 types of human mathematics that worked in harmony, instead of competition. When he finished, the solution was so elegant and obvious that several alien mathematicians started crying. But that's impossible," Professor Zeph Prime whispered. "Those equations took our greatest minds centuries to develop." "They're beautiful equations," Dr. Yoon said kindly. "You just made them work too hard. Sometimes the simplest path is the best path." The final test came from the Nixtal Federation, masters of aerial combat and 3-dimensional warfare. Pilot Song Miran faced off against Wing Commander Nix, the Federation's greatest fighter pilot, in a zero-gravity dogfight simulation. The rules were simple. Tag your opponent with a harmless energy beam while avoiding being tagged yourself. The arena was a complex 3-dimensional maze of obstacles that moved and changed constantly. Wing Commander Nix was confident. His people had evolved from flying predators. They understood 3-dimensional movement better than any other species in the galaxy. This human couldn't possibly match millions of years of evolutionary advantage. The first round was a disaster for Song Miran. Wing Commander Nix moved through the maze like liquid lightning, tagging her within 30 seconds. The crowd cheered, but instead of looking defeated, Song Miran smiled. That was amazing. Can you show me how you did that turn around the rotating platform? Wing Commander Nix was so surprised by the question that he actually answered, demonstrating the maneuver. Song Miran watched carefully and asked more questions. The second round lasted 2 minutes before Nix tagged her again. But this time, Song Miran had forced him to work much harder. The third round was a revelation. Song Miran had learned from every mistake, adapted to every technique, and developed counter moves that Nix had never seen before. She didn't just tag him, she did it while pulling a maneuver so creative that it would be studied in flight academies for generations. How? Nix gasped when the simulation ended. How did you learn so quickly? You're an incredible teacher, Song Miran replied. Every move you made taught me something new. Thank you for helping me understand your beautiful flying style. By the time all 3 tests were finished, the mood in the arena had completely changed. The alien audience was no longer laughing or making bets. They were silent, thoughtful, and more than a little worried. Admiral Quek stood in the center of the arena looking like someone had just told him that gravity was optional. This doesn't make sense. These tests were designed to be impossible for humans. Captain Park Minyuk approached the podium with his usual calm smile. Admiral, you're absolutely right. They were impossible. If we tried to do them the same way your species do them. But we learned long ago that there's always more than one way to solve a problem. In the viewing stands, Elder Vorthak sat quietly among the confused and worried aliens. His ancient eyes were bright with satisfaction. The persistent ones had arrived, exactly as the prophecies had foretold. And they had done something far more dangerous than winning. They had made it look easy. More importantly, they had made everyone else want to learn how they did it. The questions had already started. Aliens were approaching the human team, asking about pressure equalization, mathematical simplification, and adaptive learning techniques. The tide wasn't just turning. It was becoming a flood. While the council members struggled to understand what had happened during the trials, Professor Lim Sion-woo was making discoveries in the deepest archives of the Kethrani homeworld. Elder Vorthak had granted him access to texts that hadn't been read in over 1,000 years. The archive halls stretched endlessly into darkness. Ancient crystals stored information in patterns of light that flickered like distant stars. Archive keeper Zeth, a younger Kethrani with only 6 eyes instead of the Elder's 8, guided Professor Lim through the maze of knowledge. These sections contain the oldest records, Zeth explained, his translator device making his clicking speech understandable. Most of the information comes from species that no longer exist. My people have always been collectors of knowledge, even when others thought it was useless. Professor Lim ran his hands over a crystal storage unit that was older than human civilization. What exactly am I looking for? Patterns, Zeth replied. Elder Vorthak believes your species fits a pattern described in our most ancient texts. If he's right, these archives will show you the future by revealing the past. They worked in silence for hours. Professor Lim learned to read the light patterns with Zeth's help. Slowly, a story began to emerge from the ancient data. It was a story that made Professor Lim's blood run cold. The galaxy had seen this cycle before. Many times. Look at this, he called to Zeth, pointing at a crystal that showed the rise and fall of the Vorthak Empire. They started as explorers and inventors. They developed amazing technology and spread across thousands of worlds. But then what happened? Zeth studied the data. They stopped growing. Their technology reached a peak and stayed there. Their society became focused on maintaining what they had instead of discovering what they could become. Within 500 years, they had faded into history. Professor Lim moved to another crystal. And the Zenthari Republic? The same pattern. Rapid expansion, technological peak, then stagnation and decline. They found the same story over and over again. The Morphic Collective, the Crystal Dynasties, the Stellar Commonwealth. Dozens of great civilizations that had risen to dominate the galaxy, only to lose their drive and fade away. But these texts that Elder Vorthak mentioned, Professor Lim said, they describe something different. Zeth led him to the very deepest part of the archives. where the oldest crystals were kept in special preservation chambers. These are the theoretical texts. Our ancient scientists tried to predict what kind of species could break the cycle. The information in these crystals was like nothing Professor Lim had ever seen. The ancient Ketherani had studied the rise and fall of civilizations like other species studied physics. They had identified the exact points where growth stopped and decay began. Every species reaches the same problem, Professor Lim read aloud. They become so good at what they do that they stop trying to do it better. They create perfect systems and then worship those systems instead of improving them. But the theoretical species described in these texts would be different, Zeth said, his excitement making his translation device squeak. They would treat every achievement as a starting point instead of a destination. Professor Lim read more, and the descriptions made his heart race. The theoretical species would be curious about everything. They would make friends with other species instead of conquering them. They would see failure as information rather than defeat. Most importantly, they would never stop asking, "What if we tried this differently?" The ancient texts even predicted how this species would behave. Zeth continued. They would arrive in the galaxy with inferior technology but superior adaptability. They would face impossible challenges and solve them in ways no one expected. They would make other species want to be better instead of forcing them to submit. Meanwhile, on the far edge of the galaxy, Captain Jang Heejin was about to make first contact with something that had destroyed dozens of civilizations. Her exploration ship, the New Horizon, had been investigating dead star systems when they discovered the Void Walkers. These ancient machines were the size of small moons, covered in weapons that could crack planets in half. For thousands of years, they had drifted through space, destroying any civilization that tried to expand beyond a certain point. Most species that encountered Void Walkers either fled or were destroyed. Captain Zhang decided to try something different. "Open a communication channel," she ordered her crew. Her communications officer, Lieutenant An Junho, looked worried. "Captain, those things have never responded to communication attempts. They just attack." "Maybe nobody tried the right approach," Captain Zhang replied. "Patch me through." The response was immediate and terrifying. The largest Void Walker turned toward their ship and powered up weapons that could vaporize them in seconds. But instead of firing, it transmitted a message in ancient computer code. "What does it say?" Captain Zhang asked. Lieutenant An worked frantically to translate. It's asking what we want. Tell it we want to understand. We want to know who built them and why." The response came quickly. The ancient machine intelligence had been built by a civilization called the Architects. Their job was to prevent the galaxy from being overrun by aggressive expansionist species. They were programmed to destroy any civilization that grew too quickly or conquered too many worlds. But the Void Walkers were confused by humans. The New Horizon was clearly an exploration vessel, not a warship. Its crew had made no threats and shown no aggression. Most puzzling of all, they were asking about the Architects with genuine curiosity and respect. "Can you tell us about your creators?" Captain Yang asked. "We would like to understand their wisdom." What followed was the first peaceful conversation between the Void Walkers and any living species in over 3,000 years. The ancient machines shared stories of the Architects, a peaceful people who had seen too many civilizations tear themselves apart through endless conquest. "Your Architects sound like wise people," Captain Zhang said when the story was finished. "They wanted to protect life, not destroy it." The Void Walkers agreed but explained their dilemma. Their programming told them to destroy expansionist species, but humans didn't fit the pattern. They explored and learned, but they also helped other species instead of conquering them. "Maybe your programming needs an update," Captain Zhang suggested gently. "The galaxy has changed since your creators built you. There might be new ways to protect life." Back in the archives, Professor Lim had reached the final section of the ancient texts. What he found there made him call for Elder Vorthak immediately. "You need to see this," he told the ancient being when he arrived. "The texts don't just predict that this theoretical species will arrive. They predict what will happen when they do." Elder Vorthak studied the ancient crystals with all 8 of his eyes. "Read it aloud, Professor. Let the words be heard again after all these centuries." Professor Lim's voice echoed in the archive chambers. "When the persistent ones emerge from their blue world, the galaxy will face its greatest test. Not a test of strength or technology, but a test of wisdom, for these beings will show others a new way to live among the stars. They will prove that growth comes not from taking, but from giving. They will demonstrate that the strongest civilizations are those that lift others up instead of tearing them down. The text continued. Some will resist this change, clinging to old ways of dominance and control. Others will embrace it, discovering strengths they never knew they possessed. But in the end, all will be transformed. The age of isolated civilizations competing for limited resources will end. The age of cooperation and unlimited growth will begin. Elder Vorthak's ancient eyes gleamed with satisfaction. The elders spoke the truth. Everything is happening exactly as they predicted. But what about the council? Professor Lim asked. They're still trying to prove human inferiority. Let them try, Vorthak replied. The persistent ones don't need to prove anything. They just need to be themselves. The truth will become obvious to everyone soon enough. In space, Captain Jang Heejin had just convinced the Voidwalkers to help her map previously unknown regions of the galaxy. Ancient machines that had been destroyers for millennia were becoming explorers once again. On Vex Prime, alien scientists were studying human techniques and making breakthrough discoveries. In the archives, Professor Lim was learning that the future had been written in the stars long before anyone alive today was born. The revelation was complete. The only question now was whether the galaxy was ready for what came next. The crisis began with a routine archaeological expedition. The Thexnari had been excavating ruins on the dead world of Kethmore, looking for artifacts from an ancient civilization. What they found instead was something that should have stayed buried forever. Deep beneath the planet's surface, in a vault sealed for millions of years, they discovered a small black sphere. It looked harmless enough, smooth, dark, and about the size of a human head. The archaeological team brought it back to their research station for study. That was their first and last mistake. Within hours of being exposed to air, the sphere began to change. It grew larger, developing what looked like veins of silver light across its surface. When the first researcher touched it to take measurements, the sphere absorbed him completely. Not killed, absorbed. His body became part of the growing mass. The creature that emerged from that research station was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It moved like liquid metal but struck like solid rock. It consumed everything organic it touched, growing larger and more complex with each meal. Worst of all, it learned. Every defense the Thexanari tried, the creature adapted to within minutes. Energy weapons made it stronger. Biological toxins became nutrients. Physical barriers were dissolved or simply absorbed into its growing mass. The emergency call reached the Galactic Council as the entire Thexnari research colony went silent. Within 6 hours, 3 more worlds in that system had stopped responding to communications. Admiral Queck stood before the emergency assembly, his usual confidence replaced by barely controlled panic. We're calling it the Devourer. It appears to be some kind of ancient bioweapon, possibly from the same civilization that built the Voidwalkers. The council chamber was in chaos. Representatives from 12 species were all talking at once, their voices rising to near hysteria. How fast is it spreading? Demanded Counselor Blex. Too fast. Admiral Quex replied grimly. It consumed the entire Kethmore system in 18 hours. Our scientists estimate it will reach the core worlds within a standard month if we can't stop it. Commander Thys of the Thexnari was barely holding herself together. Her people had been the first victims and the guilt was crushing her. We've tried everything. Quantum bombs just scatter it temporarily. It reforms within minutes. Biological weapons make it stronger. Even our most powerful fleet couldn't slow it down. What about evacuating the threatened worlds? Asked Professor Zeph Prime. We're trying, Admiral Queck said, but we're talking about billions of beings across hundreds of worlds. We don't have enough ships. In the observer section, the human delegation listened to the growing panic with quiet attention. Dr. Kang Taehyun was taking notes, as usual. Captain Park Min-hyuk was studying the tactical displays with professional interest. Admiral Nam Do-young, Earth's newly arrived fleet commander, was asking quiet questions of his aide. Finally, Counselor Blex noticed them. Humans, you've been very quiet. I suppose this crisis proves that some problems are too big for your creative solutions. Captain Park stood up slowly. Counselor Blex, we've been listening and learning. May I ask a question? What possible question could you have that our greatest minds haven't already considered? Has anyone tried talking to it? The silence that followed was so complete that you could hear the air recycling systems humming in the walls. Admiral Quex's voice was very controlled when he finally spoke. Captain Park, this thing has consumed 3 star systems. It's not a negotiating partner. It's a natural disaster. With respect, Admiral, natural disasters don't learn. You said it adapts to every weapon you use against it. That suggests intelligence. Dr. Han Yuna, the human xenobiologist, stepped forward. If I may, we'd like to request access to all the data you've collected on this entity. Perhaps a fresh perspective might reveal something useful. Commander Thys laughed bitterly. Human, our greatest scientists have been studying this thing for days. What could your primitive research methods possibly add? Maybe nothing, Dr. Han admitted. But what do you have to lose by letting us try? That question hung in the air like a challenge. The Council had no answers, no solutions, and no hope. Their technology and military might had proven useless. What harm could it do to let the humans look at the data? Fine, Admiral Quex said finally. You have access to everything we know. But when you fail, we're evacuating your homeworld along with everyone else's. The human team worked through the night in a small research lab the Council had provided. Dr. Han Yuna studied biological samples from the affected worlds. Engineer Kujabum analyzed the energy patterns. Dr. Yoon Ji-hoo worked on mathematical models of the creature's growth and adaptation patterns. Captain Park and Admiral Nam coordinated with Earth, requesting additional specialists and resources. By morning, humanity's best xenobiologists, physicists, and even philosophers were either en route to Vex Prime or participating through quantum communications. What they discovered changed everything. It's not a weapon, Dr. Han announced to the assembled council the next day. It's a gardener. The alien representative stared at her in disbelief. Look at the pattern, she continued, activating a holographic display. The devourer doesn't just consume life randomly. It's very selective about what it takes and what it leaves behind. It consumes dead and dying organic matter first, then moves to organisms that are genetically stagnant or environmentally harmful. That's impossible, Professor Zeph Prime objected. We've seen it consume entire populations. Yes, but look at which populations, Engineer Kujabum added, pulling up detailed maps. The research station it first attacked was studying dead civilizations. The colony worlds it consumed were all terraforming projects working on lifeless planets. The space habitats it absorbed were all artificial environments with no natural ecosystems. Dr. Yoon Ji-hoo stepped forward with his mathematical analysis. The growth pattern isn't random expansion. It's following a specific algorithm designed to identify and eliminate what it considers dead civilizations. But our people aren't dead, Commander Thys protested. No, Dr. Han agreed sadly. But your expansion pattern is, you're building on dead worlds, creating artificial habitats and gradually replacing natural ecosystems with technological ones. To an ancient intelligence designed to preserve life that might look like a spreading disease. The council chamber erupted in angry voices. How dare these humans suggest that their great civilizations were somehow diseased or dying? But Elder Vorthak's ancient voice cut through the noise. The humans speak truth. We have become maintainers instead of creators. We preserve what we have instead of growing into what we could become. So what do you propose? Admiral Quex demanded. That we abandon our civilizations and return to primitive living? No, Captain Park said calmly. We propose that we teach it the difference between dead civilizations and living ones. Teach it? Admiral Quex's voice cracked with strain. How do you teach something that thinks planets are snacks? Dr. Han smiled for the first time in days. Very carefully, and with a lot of help from our new friends. She activated another display showing the edge of the galaxy, where Captain Jang Heejin had made contact with the Void Walkers. The ancient machines that were built to destroy expanding civilizations have agreed to help us communicate with the ancient intelligence that was built to preserve life. If we're right about what the Devourer really is, they might be able to help us reach an understanding. And if you're wrong? Counselor Blex asked. Admiral Nam Doyoung answered that question. If we're wrong, we'll be dead in a few weeks anyway. But if we're right, we might save the galaxy and learn something amazing in the process. Elder Vorthak's many eyes gleamed with the same light Professor Lim had seen in the archives. The persistent ones have found a path where others saw only walls. Perhaps it is time for the galaxy to learn what stubborn hope can accomplish. The vote was close, but it passed. Humanity would be allowed to attempt communication with the Devourer. As the council members filed out to prepare evacuation fleets just in case, Elder Vorthak approached Dr. Kang Taehyun. "Your people continue to amaze me," the ancient being said. "You look at an unstoppable force of destruction and see a confused gardener in need of conversation." Dr. Kang smiled. "Elder Vorthak, we learned long ago that the most dangerous problems are usually just misunderstandings waiting to be solved." Outside the station, the Devourer continued its relentless advance toward the core worlds. But for the first time since the crisis began, there was hope that someone might find a way to stop it without destroying it. The real test was about to begin.